Are you a dealer creating a workplace culture your employees are proud to be part of? Applications are now open for the 2026 Automotive News Best Dealerships to Work For program. This isn't just an award, it's a chance to get real insight into what's working at your dealership and where you can improve. And we've expanded the categories this year, recognizing everything from technician experience and leadership development to AI enablement and employee retention. The registration deadline is April 17th. Find out more and apply at autonews.com.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Friday, February 20th, 2026. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, the Supreme Court strikes down many of President Trump's tariffs. Meanwhile, tariff-driven price hikes are already hitting dealer lots. And VW workers in Chattanooga ratified their first UAW contract in a landslide. Plus, automotive news reporter John Hutter explains why the IRS is excluding negative equity from the new auto loan interest deduction.
The IRS is already kind of picking and choosing if they're saying, well, a service contract counts as part of a car loan, but negative equity doesn't. Well, it's kind of like, well, what's the distinction there? Why wouldn't you just simplify it?
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. The U.S. Supreme Court has struck down many of President Trump's tariffs, ruling they were issued illegally under the 1977 Emergency Powers Law. The 6-3 decision affects reciprocal tariffs and duties on Canadian, Mexican, and Chinese goods. But tariffs on vehicles, auto parts, steel, aluminum, and copper are still in place. The auto industry paid about $8.6 billion through October 2025 in duties that are now deemed unconstitutional. That's according to PwC. The court didn't say whether refunds are owed or how they'd be distributed. We'll hear more on this story in a minute with our own John Irwin. Despite that ruling, Trump's tariffs are already hitting dealer lots hard. New data from Catalyst IQ shows vehicles assembled in Canada have seen the steepest price hikes. Sticker prices jumped nearly $4,000 or almost 10% since October. Japanese-built vehicles rose about $3,300, while German-built models increased over $2,800. Vehicles from Mexico were up more than $1,500. Rick Wainshell, Vice President of Analytics at Catalyst IQ, says automakers used model year changeovers to quietly raise prices, about $1,200 more aggressively than last year. Toyota's Andrew Gilliland warned in January that further increases are coming, saying manufacturers can't hold out much longer from passing tariff costs to consumers. And Volkswagen workers in Chattanooga have ratified their first contract with the UAW in a landslide vote. UAW President Shawn Fain says 96% of workers approve the 4-year pact, which takes effect February 23rd. The deal delivers a 20% wage increase over 5 years, a $4,000 ratification bonus, and annual bonuses of $2,500. It's a major victory for the union in its decades-long push to organize foreign-owned plants in the South, and caps nearly 2 years since workers first voted to join. And those are today's headlines. You can read more about all those stories and follow along with the latest news at autonews.com. Now let's dig deeper into that Supreme Court decision. Joining me is John Irwin, who's been covering the story for us at Automotive News. John, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Thanks for having me.
So, John, the Supreme Court didn't spell out how these refunds would work for these tariffs that have now been deemed unconstitutional. What are you hearing about what happens next for automakers and suppliers who have already paid billions in these duties?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I think a lot of people were expecting the Supreme Court to at least mention a little bit about how the refund process might work, or at least direct the federal government to say that they should refund businesses that have paid these tariffs. There was no mention of it. How that process works is really up in the air, and I've talked with a few trade experts who have basically said, we're just waiting to see how the Trump administration might approach this, whether they could voluntarily, if they want to, set up a refund program. Whether they choose to do that or not is still up in the air as of taping. But no matter what happens, just given the scale of these tariffs, it's going to be a messy process. I think that's pretty much accepted across the board. That was something that The lawyers advocating for the businesses who brought this lawsuit against the Trump administration even acknowledged. Brett Kavanaugh in his dissent noted that as well, that this is going to be, the refund process will be messy no matter what, just given the scale. We're talking billions and billions of dollars across industries, across sectors. There are goods being shipped right now in the middle of the Pacific Ocean or that are in port right now, where the whole idea was that they were going to implement have to pay the tariff on those goods. Now they might not have to. Do they have to immediately? There's all sorts of questions about how this will work, how quickly it'll happen. I think most people are expecting no matter what, there will be more lawsuits. So no matter what, it's going to be a messy, probably lengthy process. That said, I know a lot of people in the auto industry, especially suppliers, I think are generally speaking, are the ones who have paid these tariffs more than maybe automakers who are more susceptible to the auto tariff, which is still in effect. A lot of these suppliers are kind of expecting that, maybe eventually they will get that refund, but what that looks like, how they have to work with their automakers who have reimbursed them for their tariff costs. I mean, it's a very messy, convoluted process. It's going to take weeks, months, maybe years to figure out.
Now, the ruling leaves vehicle and auto parts tariffs in place since they were issued under different legal authorities. Does this decision give companies any new legal footing to challenge those remaining tariffs, or are we looking at a completely separate fight there?
I think generally speaking, we're looking at a separate fight. And I've talked with a couple trade experts today who note that, some people would argue that, maybe some of the ways that some of these other tariffs, like Section 232 tariffs on steel, aluminum, the vehicles, auto parts, there are, some who might argue that the way they've been implemented, sort of pushing the boundaries of what the law says the president can do, but it's a little less cut and dry maybe than a lot of legal experts viewed this particular case when it came to reciprocal tariffs. Section 232 authority, which is used for vehicles and auto parts, has been previously used by other administrations, and they followed. It's been in place since 1962. There's a whole process where there has to be an investigation done by the Commerce Department on a national security ground, and it's a somewhat lengthy process and a little bit more well established. Whereas the Trump administration was the first one to ever use this 1974 law, which was under question today, to use it for tariffs, as opposed to in the past other presidents have used that law to implement sanctions or embargoes on other countries. So, whether it gives some new footing, I guess remains to be seen. That said, given, we expect the Trump administration to pursue new tariffs to kind of make up for the lost tariff revenue that they're seeing today. A lot of those new tariffs, though, they're a little more limited in scope. Maybe they can issue something right away, but then they need Congress to extend it, or there needs to be an investigation that has to be done. I think a lot of suppliers, especially, they've been, during the tariff saga over the past several months, they've been, sort of worried that, okay, there's an announcement about a new tariff and then it goes into effect a few days later. That, at least for now, maybe seems like that threat is kind of dissipated. There might be new tariffs, but they might be a little more limited in scope, or there will be more time needed to have to implement them, which gives those businesses more time to adapt. So that's sort of where we're standing right now. We'll see what the White House does. We'll see how they respond, what they might implement instead. But yeah, there's a lot going on, and I'm sure suppliers, automakers are paying very close attention to where things go from here.
All right, John Irwin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much.
Coming up, a deeper dive into the IRS decision on negative equity and the new auto loan interest deduction. That's next on Daily Drive.
The auto industry is the most disrupted on the planet right now. On this week's episode of the Automotive News Shift podcast, we hear from Dan Hirsch, global co-leader of automotive and industrial practice at AlixPartners. He breaks down the firm's 2026 Disruption Index and explains why tariffs, geopolitical tensions, and the rise of the Chinese automakers are leaving global executives struggling to plan for the future.
Senior executives, they are either finding themselves in a spot where they have to redefine themselves, which can be very difficult when you're really well established, or they're going to find themselves in a very different role or in a very different company.
I'm Molly Boygon. Join me on Shift, available this Sunday wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. The IRS says consumers can deduct interest on service contracts finance with their auto loan this tax season, but not on negative equity rolled into the loan. That can be a problem when nearly 30% of fourth quarter trade-ins had negative equity. Automotive News retail F&I reporter John Hutter talked with our own Jake Neer about it. Jake reached him at his home office near Grand Rapids, Michigan.
John Hutter, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Hey, great to be here.
So this is a really interesting decision here by the IRS. But before we dive into that, remind us how this new auto loan interest deduction actually works. I mean, who's qualified? What's the potential benefit for consumers buying a new vehicle? Sort of the basics here.
Basically, last year, Congress passed and President Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which had a lot of tax changes. And one of them that they added was you could deduct auto loan interest on American-made vehicles, and you could do it even if you were taking the standard deduction, which basically every American, it's like 90% of American taxpayers do that. So so you can deduct starting with this tax season, because they made it retroactive for any car you bought in 2025. You can deduct up to $10,000 each year on any interest you paid for a vehicle. It has to have final assembly in America, and and then it has to be used personal use. And if you make more than 100 grand, or if you're a household with more than 200 grand, it starts tapering off how much you can actually deduct. But and it'll run through the 2028 tax year. So unless Congress renews it.
So the IRS says that this tax season you can deduct interest on service contracts, but not on negative equity rolled into the loan.
Right.
Why is that distinction such a big deal for dealers and the industry?
Yeah, and the IRS was kind of in a tough spot because they're trying to do actual formal regulations on all this stuff, but they also, since the bill was passed in the summer and it was retroactive, they kind of had to come up with something for this tax season. So anyway, they've said that you'll be able to deduct service contracts, sales tax, any of the interest that you're paying on that part of the loan, but you can't do negative equity. And what's tough about that is that there's a lot of people do have negative equity rolled into their car loan, especially if you bought maybe in the last couple of years when prices were kind of elevated because of the lack of inventory. You might still owe more on the trade-in vehicle than your car is worth, than that car is actually worth. So you roll it into the new loan. Under this, you couldn't deduct it, which is going to kind of raise, I would imagine, some issues for both lenders and consumers, because you've got to figure out how much of your interest actually went to that negative equity versus the other parts of the loan. So that's going to be kind of a complicated thing, I would imagine, because my understanding, and my car loan didn't have negative equity on it, so I can't say this for sure, but my understanding is you just get your car, you make your car payment, and it says I would imagine your principal and interest, but it doesn't say what the interest is actually. It's not itemized like that. So somebody's going to have to figure out. The good news for dealers is the service contract being deductible interest is huge, because that too is usually financed as part of a loan. It's something that, a lot of dealers sell on a lot of vehicles. And so that's a big perk for consumers and dealers.
Good job getting that flex in there, John.
Yeah, I know, right?
Well, as we've talked about, NADA and AFSA are pushing back pretty hard on this as the IRS looks at adopting formal rules as well. What is their core argument as sort of the main trade groups here for why negative equity interest should be deductible?
Right. And it kind of comes back to, and that's the thing. I mean, everybody's kind of out of luck on this, as far as I know, for this year, but the actual rules is still in place. So for future years, it might well change. And that's where AFSA and NADA are trying to make an impact. And really the issue is the complexity. There's the complexity factor that somebody's going to have to split this stuff out of the loan. AFSA has said, well, look, if we don't want you to do this, but if you're going to make us do it, at least let us do it proportionally, where, we can just say, okay, 10% of it is negative equity or whatever. But they're hoping that it doesn't happen. And one of the, because of that issue, and their argument, especially AFSA's, is, well, the bill the bill that enacted this thing just says any interest on the car loan. And so, and since the IRS is already kind of picking and choosing if they're saying, well, a service contract counts as part of a car loan, but negative equity doesn't. Well, it's kind of like, well, what's the distinction there? Why wouldn't you just simplify it and just make everything, any interest with the car loan is subjective? So that's kind of where they're both going with it right now. The language, yeah, I mean, to me, it does seem a little weird to pick and choose like that. That if you're going to have this one thing that isn't related to the actual metal of the vehicle being sold bundled into it, then why wouldn't anything else tied into the deal also count? So, I mean, I think there's certainly an argument there, and from the convenience factor and not having to, upset how consumers, to make it easier for consumers as well, because if the lenders don't really tease it out, the consumer will probably have to do the math themselves. And that's, I mean, I read about finance for a living, and I couldn't do it myself without, like a calculator, like the finance calculators.
Sure. So I am curious, John, when it comes to the role of the dealerships in this, the F&I office and so forth, what kind of role are they playing in this process? I mean, do you get the sense that this is a headache for them in terms of like trying to walk their customers through what's, available to them, what they can do, and if things change, does that cause even more headaches in some ways?
Right. And I've been, and I haven't really dug as much into that one, because the bigger issue for dealers, I would imagine this tax season, is just because customers are probably going to have a lot bigger refunds than usual, which is a benefit. So I haven't really dug into how many of them are having to coach consumers on, filling out their tax returns yet on this thing. But I would imagine there is, certainly an education role for the dealership, in terms of if the customer does have questions, you're going to need to be prepared for that. So that means, that I guess, that does, I guess, complicate life for a dealership. You just need to be, up to it. Also, it's kind of, I guess to some degree, it's kind of to your interest, because if you've got an eligible vehicle on the lot and you're trying to sell it to a consumer, and you can say, well, look, you can deduct the interest on this one, so there's a benefit as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess on that kind of line of thinking, beyond negative equity, what's one thing that dealers need to know about this deduction as they're working with consumers this tax season going forward? What is maybe the one nugget that they should take away from this?
Not to make your life harder, I would say there's two, actually.
Okay.
One is just knowing what vehicles are eligible, in which I think the IRS has issued guidance where there's one of the stickers on the vehicle, the mandatory stickers, has if the location it was built at. And that's all that matters, is really the final assembly. So that should be pretty easy to figure out. Just if it was built in the US, you're good to go. You don't have to worry about, it's not like the tariff thing where you got to worry about where maybe certain parts came from or something like that. It's just if they built the thing here, they put it all together here, we're good. The other thing I think that dealers are going to want to pay attention to is just who's eligible. It's pretty loose. Like, you can buy it for a family. If a family member using the vehicle is okay, like your kid or something like that. And you're even allowed a little bit of usage. Let's say you have a side hustle as a rideshare driver, or a DoorDash or something like that. As long as, I think it's 51% is personal use, you're okay to count the vehicle. They're not going to be a stickler on, well, this is a commercial vehicle because you're using it for a job, 20% of your life or something like that. So I think those are going to be the two things to really hone in on with consumers, and you can kind of reassure them, or you can say, well, look, no, you're going to Uber this, you're going to be an Uber driver in this thing for 80% of your time. You can't deduct the interest. So, things like that.
So finally, John, the IRS has a hearing scheduled for Tuesday of next week on this. I'm curious what you're watching for, and do you think they could actually change course on this negative equity issue?
I think so, just because it's, well, I'm going to be watching to obviously hear, AFSA is speaking. I don't think NADA is, but AFSA, which represents all the auto lenders, certainly is one of the guests scheduled. So I'm going to be watching for their argument. Yeah, I think they could reverse course. I think there's just if you're trying to, if the Trump administration is serious about kind of getting rid of bureaucracy and making things more consumer friendly, just really simplifying the rules to just, okay, is the car American made and used personally? Does it meet the criteria in the law? All right, well, look, just any of the interest tied to the loan is all right. So I think there could, the one thing that I think could maybe deter them from doing that is, well, let's say it's negative equity on a car that isn't American made, which, I mean, good luck trying to trace that on, a trade-in used vehicle. But I mean, that could be a sticking point. There's also kind of one of those where you don't want to just let any old thing bundled into the loan. Like, hey, we're going to, also, I don't know, like finance. Like I said, I believe there's something that they're looking at on like, if you're trying to buy like a big horse trailer and attach it to the car or something like that and finance that, there might be some, I can't remember if there's a language around what you can and can't do there, so that'd be the counter argument. But I just, from a simplicity sake thing, if you're going to allow service contracts, which is, again, a win for dealers, then you kind of have to allow anything else that's not the metal,
Right.
So who knows? We'll see.
No pun intended. I said interesting. Yeah. All right. John Hutter covers retail finance and insurance for us at Automotive News. John, really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for your great reporting.
Hey, thanks again.
That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to our own John Irwin, Larry Velquette, and Jack Walsworth for their reporting for today's podcast. You can get the latest news on the IRS tax deduction, tariffs and trade, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back over the weekend for our Weekend Drive edition of the show with our own Larry Velquette and Greg Layson. We'll dive more into the Supreme Court's tariff ruling and more of the week's biggest news stories.
If I'm a supplier or if I'm an automaker who did pay a couple $100 million in duties that are now unconstitutional, damn right I want my money back.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.